Have you ever looked at your DNA test results and wondered why that sliver, or maybe even a significant chunk, of Scandinavian ancestry is there? For many, it's a surprise, sparking questions about their family history. Was there a long-lost Viking ancestor? Or does it go deeper, tracing back to a time of ancient migrations and civilizations? Scandinavian DNA is more than just a label on a pie chart. It's a genetic fingerprint that carries the legacy of some of the most dynamic and far-reaching people in human history. But what does it truly mean to have Scandinavian DNA? Is it all about the Vikings? Or is there a richer, more complex story hidden in our genes? Today, we'll uncover the fascinating tale of Scandinavian DNA, a journey that takes us through the Ice Age, the Viking Age, and the turbulent centuries that followed. Along the way, we'll explore how migrations, cultural clashes, and even pandemics shaped the genetics of an entire region. So, whether you've discovered traces of Scandinavian DNA in your results or you're just curious about the history of this iconic region, you're in for a journey through time and science. Let's dive into the genetic story of Scandinavian DNA and unravel the mysteries that connect us all. When we talk about Scandinavian DNA, what exactly do we mean? Is it tied to a specific geography, a group of people, or something more nuanced? To understand, we need to look at Scandinavia not just as a region on the map but as a melting pot of cultures, migrations, and genetic influences over millennia. Scandinavia today encompasses Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, countries with deep historical connections. But from a genetic perspective, the story is broader. Iceland, though separated geographically, was settled by Norwegians and continues to carry a strong Scandinavian genetic legacy. Greenland, too, plays a role, having been colonized by the Norse during the Viking Age. Finland, however, presents a unique case. Despite its close ties to Sweden and Norway, it is often excluded from discussions of Scandinavian DNA. Why? The Finnish population has distinct Uralic genetic markers from migrations out of northeastern Europe. Yet, many Finnish people also carry Scandinavian ancestry, a testament to centuries of shared history and intermarriage. Then there's Denmark, a bridge between Scandinavia and continental Europe. While Danish DNA is predominantly Scandinavian, centuries of interaction with Germanic tribes have left their imprint, particularly in southern Denmark. Scandinavian DNA isn't confined to modern-day borders. Its genetic signature stretches far beyond, influenced by the movements of its people, especially during the Viking Age. What remains consistent is that Scandinavian DNA represents a blend of ancient migrations, cultural exchanges, and survival in a harsh, northern environment. So, when you see Scandinavian in your DNA test results, remember, it's not just a point on a map, it's a connection to a vast network of history, culture, and human resilience. To truly understand Scandinavian DNA, we must go back, way back, to the end of the Ice Age, when Scandinavia was a barren, frozen land. As the glacier retreated around 11,700 years ago, life began to return, and with it came the first humans. These early settlers arrived from the south, following herds of animals and warmer climates. The first wave of migration brought hunter-gatherers who relied on the land and sea for survival. They were resilient, thriving in a landscape of dense forests and icy waters. Their genetic legacy formed the foundation of Scandinavia's early population. But their story didn't remain static. As the ice melted in the north, another group of people moved in from the northeast, crossing into northern Finland and Norway. This migration introduced Uralic genetic markers, creating the beginnings of the north-south genetic gradient still visible in Scandinavians today. Fast forward a few thousand years, and another major shift took place. Around 6,000 years ago, farming populations from Anatolia, in what is now Turkey, began migrating into Europe. These farmers brought agriculture, advanced tools, and domesticated animals, forever changing the landscape. When they reached Scandinavia, they replaced much of the native hunter-gatherer population. Genetic studies reveal this wasn't a peaceful transition. Clashes between these groups, coupled with new diseases brought by livestock, likely led to the near-total replacement of the local population. These early migrations set the stage for Scandinavia's genetic diversity. By the time the Viking Age began, the DNA of Scandinavians already carried the marks of thousands of years of movement, adaptation, and survival. The story of these early settlers reminds us that the land we now call Scandinavia has been shaped by waves of change, both cultural and genetic. It's a history written in their DNA and, for many of us, in ours as well. When we think of Scandinavian DNA, it's impossible not to conjure images of the Vikings, the fearless seafarers who left an indelible mark on history. From the 8th to the 11th centuries, the Viking Age saw Scandinavian warriors, traders, and settlers expand far beyond their homelands. But what does this period tell us about the genetic legacy they left behind? The Vikings originated in present-day Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. With their mastery of shipbuilding and navigation, they ventured far and wide. They weren't just raiders, they were explorers who established settlements as close as Scotland and Ireland and as far as Greenland and North America. Iceland, for example, was colonized almost entirely by Norwegians, creating a genetic and cultural link that persists to this day. In Britain and Ireland, the Vikings didn't just raid, they settled, married, and integrated. DNA evidence shows a significant Scandinavian influence in these regions, particularly in coastal areas like the northeast of England and the islands of Scotland. Even the Normans, who famously conquered England in 1066, traced their roots back to Vikings who settled in northern France. But the influence of the Vikings wasn't just outbound. They also brought foreign DNA back to Scandinavia. During their travels, they captured slaves, traded goods, and formed alliances. These interactions introduced genetic diversity into the Scandinavian gene pool, with contributions from as far afield as the Mediterranean and the Middle East. The Vikings' genetic impact wasn't limited to Europe. Their reach extended eastward into Russia and beyond. The word Russ, which would later define Russia, is believed to have originated from a Norse word. Scandinavian settlers established trading posts and routes that connected northern Europe to Constantinople and the Islamic caliphates. Back at home, the Vikings were not a single, unified group but rather a collection of communities with shared cultural traits. Genetic studies show that even within Scandinavia, there were regional differences in ancestry, influenced by geography and historical interactions. The Viking Age was transformative for Scandinavia and the world. It was a time of cultural exchange, expansion, and integration. The DNA of modern Scandinavians carries the echoes of this era, and so, too, does the DNA of countless others across Europe and beyond. If you've ever wondered how Scandinavian DNA made its way into your genetic profile, chances are the Vikings had something to do with it. Scandinavia's genetic story is not one of gradual evolution. It's a tale of dramatic shifts, where entire populations were replaced and new ones emerged. These major turnovers, occurring thousands of years before the Viking Age, shaped the foundation of what we now consider Scandinavian DNA. The first major population shift happened around 6,000 years ago during the Neolithic Age. Farming populations from Anatolia, present-day Turkey, made their way into Europe, bringing agriculture, new tools, and domesticated animals. When they reached Scandinavia, they encountered the Irritable culture, a group of hunter-gatherers who had lived there for thousands of years. But this meeting wasn't peaceful. Genetic evidence and archaeological findings suggest that the Irritable population was almost entirely replaced. Clashes over resources, combined with new diseases brought by the Anatolian farmers' livestock, led to a near-total population turnover. These newcomers, known as the funnel-beaker culture, introduced not only farming but also a new genetic signature that transformed the region. Then, around 5,000 years ago, another upheaval occurred. The Yemner people, semi-nomadic herders from the Pontic steppe in what is now Ukraine and southern Russia, began moving into Scandinavia. They brought with them innovations like the wheel, horse-drawn carts, and metalworking. Their arrival marked the second major population turnover in the region. The Yemner didn't just bring tools and technology. They brought their genes. Genetic studies show that the Yemner left a significant mark on the Scandinavian gene pool, with their DNA forming a large part of the ancestry of modern Scandinavians. The funnel-beaker culture, once dominant, faded away, replaced by the corded ware culture, known for its distinctive pottery and pastoral lifestyle. Interestingly, the genetic mixing between these populations often came through women. Studies suggest that women from the farming communities frequently married men from the Yemner and other incoming groups, blending the genetic legacy of the old with the new. These population turnovers were not merely local events, they were part of a larger pattern of migration and change across Europe. But in Scandinavia, They set the stage for the unique genetic makeup of the region. By the time the Viking Age began, the people of Scandinavia were already a blend of ancient hunter-gatherers, Anatolian farmers, and Yemnir herders, a genetic cocktail that gave rise to the explorers and conquerors we now know as the Vikings. The DNA of modern Scandinavians still carries traces of these ancient turnovers. Each shift, each migration, added another layer to the story, creating a rich and complex heritage that continues to fascinate scientists and genealogists alike. Modern Scandinavians carry a genetic legacy shaped by thousands of years of migrations, conflicts, and cultural exchanges. But how does their DNA compare to the people who lived in Scandinavia during the Viking Age, or even earlier? The answer lies in both continuity and change. Over time, Scandinavia has seen a decline in non-local ancestry. During the Viking Age, the region was a hub of genetic mixing due to the Vikings' far-reaching travels and interactions. Today, however, the genetic influence of those outside regions has diminished, leaving a stronger representation of native Scandinavian ancestry in modern populations. One key feature of modern Scandinavian genetics is the north-south gradient. This gradient reflects historical migrations, with Uralic genetic markers more common in the north, especially in northern Norway and Sweden. These markers can be traced back to the northeast migrations that occurred after the Ice Age. Meanwhile, southern Scandinavians show greater influence from Central and Southern Europe, reflecting the impact of the Anatolian farmers and their descendants. Modern Scandinavians also carry unique genetic signatures linked to ancient populations like the Yemnir and corded ware cultures. The Yemnir, who arrived around 5,000 years ago, contributed not only to the genetic makeup of Scandinavians but also to traits like lactose tolerance, a critical adaptation for populations reliant on dairy farming in harsh climates. Another fascinating aspect of Scandinavian DNA is its resilience and adaptation. For thousands of years, Scandinavians have lived in environments with long, harsh winters and limited sunlight. These conditions influence genetic traits such as lighter skin, which aids in vitamin D synthesis, and other adaptations related to diet and climate. Despite these ancient roots, genetic studies show that Scandinavians are far from homogeneous. Regional differences persist, shaped by geography and historical isolation. For example, the genetic makeup of someone from Iceland, where the population is relatively isolated, differs from that of someone in southern Denmark, which has seen more interaction with continental Europe. Modern technology allows researchers to trace these differences with remarkable precision. By comparing ancient and modern DNA, scientists have uncovered a detailed picture of how Scandinavian genetics have evolved over time. It's a story of survival, adaptation, and the blending of diverse ancestries into the unique populations we see today. For many people, discovering a connection to Scandinavian DNA is more than just a genealogical curiosity. It's a link to this rich and complex history. From the ancient hunter-gatherers to the Yemnir herders and beyond, each generation has left its mark, creating a genetic legacy that continues to evolve. Scandinavian DNA isn't confined to the borders of Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. Its genetic influence has traveled far and wide, a testament to the extraordinary reach of the people who called this region home. Whether through exploration, conquest, or migration, Scandinavian DNA has left an indelible mark on populations across Europe and beyond. One of the most significant contributors to this spread was the Viking Age. From the 8th to the 11th centuries, Viking ships sailed across the North Sea, Atlantic Ocean, and Baltic Sea, carrying Scandinavian settlers to new lands. In the British Isles, particularly Scotland and northeastern England, Viking settlements introduced Scandinavian genes into local populations. The Orkney and Shetland Islands, for instance, still show a strong genetic imprint from this era. Ireland also felt the Viking touch. DNA studies reveal traces of Scandinavian ancestry in coastal regions, particularly near ancient Viking strongholds like Dublin. In France, the region of Normandy owes its name, and much of its early population, to Norse settlers. These Northmen, or Normans, would later conquer England in 1066, spreading their genetic influence even further. But the Viking Age wasn't the only era of Scandinavian expansion. Earlier migrations also played a role. For example, during the migration period of late antiquity, Germanic tribes with Scandinavian roots moved into Central Europe. Over time, these migrations left Scandinavian genetic signatures in regions like northern Germany and the Netherlands. Eastern Europe was another significant destination for Scandinavian settlers. The Rus, a group of Norse traders and warriors, established a network of trading posts along rivers in modern-day Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. Their influence is evident not just in historical records but also in the genetic makeup of populations in these regions. Interestingly, the influence of Scandinavian DNA isn't just outbound, it's reciprocal. The Vikings and earlier Scandinavian populations often integrated with local communities, introducing foreign DNA into their own gene pool. For instance, the Vikings brought back slaves and goods from their expeditions, leading to a genetic blend that reflects contributions from regions as far away as the Mediterranean and the Middle East. DNA testing reveals just how far-reaching Scandinavian genetics have become. Many people in regions like Britain, Ireland, and northern France discover unexpected Scandinavian ancestry in their results, even if historical records don't show a direct connection. This is because genetic influences from ancient migrations and intermarriage can persist for generations, quietly shaping the genetic makeup of modern populations. Scandinavian DNA tells a story of movement and connection. It's a reminder that our ancestors were rarely confined to one place. They traveled, traded, and integrated, leaving a shared genetic legacy that spans continents. So, if you find Scandinavian DNA in your results, you're not alone. It's a common thread that ties together countless stories of exploration and survival. For many, the journey into Scandinavian ancestry begins with a DNA test. But what can these tests really tell us? And how can they help uncover the hidden connections to this fascinating region? When you receive your DNA test results, you're looking at more than just percentages on a pie chart. Those percentages represent connections to ancient populations, shaped by migrations, intermarriage, and cultural exchanges. For those with Scandinavian ancestry, the results often point to the impact of the Viking Age and earlier migrations that spread Scandinavian DNA across Europe. But why do so many people find Scandinavian ancestry in their results, even when their family trees don't show a direct connection? The answer lies in history. Scandinavian DNA is closely tied to regions that were influenced by Norse settlers. If your ancestors lived in the British Isles, northern France, or parts of Eastern Europe, it's likely you'll carry traces of Scandinavian DNA, even if your family hasn't lived in Scandinavia for centuries. Understanding your results requires more than just reading an ethnicity estimate. Advances in DNA testing have introduced tools like cluster matching and triangulation, which help identify genetic segments shared with others. By analyzing these shared segments, genealogists can piece together how individuals are related and trace their ancestry back to specific regions or populations. For example, if your DNA matches a cluster of individuals from Norway, Iceland, or Denmark, it might suggest a direct connection to Viking settlers. On the other hand, matches in regions like northeastern England or Scotland could point to the lasting influence of Viking settlements in the British Isles. Of course, DNA testing isn't without its challenges. Ethnicity estimates are just that, estimates. Testing companies use different algorithms and reference populations, so the results can vary. One company might estimate your Scandinavian ancestry at 10%, while another places it closer to 20%. That's why it's essential to use DNA testing as a starting point, combined with historical research and family records to paint a complete picture. For those willing to dig deeper, DNA can solve mysteries that traditional genealogy can't. Stories of unexpected connections are common, like discovering a Viking ancestor through shared DNA segments or identifying a lost branch of the family tree that migrated centuries ago. Modern tools also allow you to share and compare results with relatives and other testers. This collaboration can unlock insights into ancestry that might otherwise remain hidden. By working together, families and communities can trace their shared histories back to the time of ancient Scandinavians. So, whether you're just starting your genealogical journey or you've already uncovered some Scandinavian ancestry, DNA testing offers an exciting window into the past. It's a chance to connect with your history, uncover hidden stories, and understand the incredible legacy left by the people of Scandinavia. Scandinavian DNA is more than a collection of genes. It's a living archive of human history, holding valuable lessons about migration, survival, and adaptation. By studying the genetics of Scandinavians, we gain insights not only into their past but into the broader patterns that have shaped human populations across the globe. One of the most significant lessons lies in the story of migration. From the first settlers arriving after the Ice Age to the influx of Anatolian farmers and Yemnaya herders, Scandinavia has been a crossroads for different peoples. These migrations weren't just about movement, they were about transformation. Each wave of newcomers brought new technologies, ideas, and ways of life that reshaped the region. Scandinavian genetics teach us that human history is one of continual blending and adaptation. Another crucial takeaway is the role of conflict and disease in shaping populations. Genetic evidence shows that population turnovers in Scandinavia were often violent, with entire groups being replaced in just a few generations. The introduction of new pathogens played a devastating role, wiping out local populations and paving the way for others to take their place. These events serve as a stark reminder of how fragile human populations can be in the face of change. Scandinavian genetics also highlight the power of adaptation. Over thousands of years, Scandinavians evolved traits to survive in their harsh northern environment. These include lighter skin for efficient vitamin D absorption in low sunlight and lactose tolerance, which allowed them to rely on dairy products as a key food source. These adaptations reflect the resilience of the human species and its ability to thrive in challenging conditions. The study of Scandinavian DNA also has modern implications. It helps scientists trace the origins and spread of diseases, understand genetic disorders, and even develop targeted medical treatments. For example, some genetic traits common in Scandinavians are linked to autoimmune diseases, providing a unique opportunity to study these conditions and find solutions. Finally, Scandinavian genetics remind us of the interconnectedness of humanity. The Viking Age is a perfect example of how one group of people can influence the world, leaving a genetic legacy that persists across continents. It shows us that our ancestors were never isolated. They were part of a global network of movement and exchange. Whether you carry Scandinavian DNA or not, its story has something to teach all of us. It's a story of resilience, innovation, and connection. By exploring this history, we gain a deeper understanding of ourselves and the shared journey of humanity. Scandinavian DNA tells a story that spans millennia, a story of migrations, conquests, and survival in one of the world's harshest environments. It's a legacy shaped by the earliest settlers who braved the Ice Age, by farmers and herders who transformed the land, and by the Vikings, whose reach extended across continents. For many of us, discovering a connection to this rich history through our DNA is more than a scientific curiosity. It's a personal link to a past that shaped not only Scandinavia but the world. Whether you've uncovered a sliver of Scandinavian ancestry or a substantial portion, you're carrying the echoes of people who explored, adapted, and endured. But the story doesn't end there. Your DNA is just one piece of the puzzle. Modern tools like DNA tests, family trees, and genealogical research allow you to dig deeper, uncovering the hidden stories that connect you to history. Who were your ancestors? Did they sail with the Vikings, farm the Scandinavian plains, or settle in distant lands? So, why not take the next step? If you haven't already, consider taking a DNA test to explore your roots. For those who've already started this journey, dive deeper, look for clusters, connect with relatives, and share your findings. Every discovery you make adds to the greater tapestry of human history. We'd love to hear your stories, too. Have you found Scandinavian DNA in your ancestry? Did it lead to unexpected connections or insights? Share your experiences in the comments below and join the conversation. Remember, our DNA connects us all, weaving a shared history that transcends borders and time. By exploring these connections, we honor the resilience and ingenuity of those who came before us, and we learn more about who we are today. So, let's keep uncovering the mysteries of Scandinavian DNA together. Who knows what fascinating stories are still waiting to be told?